we're having this summit in part because he has to take seriously the prospect that Trump picks up his ball and goes home, and then he loses, really what is the only source of genuine leverage he has over the Ukrainians and the Europeans, and that makes this a much more difficult equation for him.
Let's talk about what's happening in Alaska, the talks between Russia and the United States over the future of Ukraine. Keir Starmer won't be there. He'll be listening, like all of us, to the outcome from this side of the pond, as will, of course, Volodymyr Zelensky, the Ukrainian president, who was in Downing Street yesterday. Things kick off at 8 o'clock, and, of course, we'll cover it all on Times Radio. This is Donald Trump speaking ahead of the meeting.
We have a meeting with President Putin tomorrow. I think it's going to be a good meeting, but the more important meeting will be the second meeting that we're having. We're going to have a meeting with President Putin, President Zelensky, myself, and maybe we'll bring some of the European leaders along, maybe not. I don't know that it's going to be very important. We're going to see what happens. And I think President Putin will make peace. I think President Zelensky will make peace. We'll see if they can get along. And if they can, it'll be great.
Coherent as ever. Our Defence Secretary, John Healey, also hit the airwaves. He spoke to Times Radio Breakfast earlier this morning.
Our first priority is to continue to stand with Ukraine as we have since the outset of this full-scale war, to step up our support for the diplomatic pressure and the economic pressure on Putin, but also to keep a focus on the front line while all eyes are on Alaska, because we can't jeopardize the peace by forgetting about the war.
So, Patrick, what was Zelensky doing in Downing Street yesterday? There was no press conference, just photographs and video.
Well, what Keir Starmer is trying to do, and I think to a certain extent is succeeding, is putting himself at the centre or in the chair of European efforts to muscle in on this peace conference, because, as you say, there's no European around that table, no European leader around that table. It has all the hallmarks of a carve-up between Trump and Putin. So what Keir Starmer and other European leaders have been doing this week, we saw earlier in the week, Keir Starmer sat at the Downing Street table with a lectern and a big plasma screen in front of him, chairing a Zoom call, is trying to put together their own proposal, almost their own counter-proposal, so they have something to say in the wake of this summit, set out their own red lines. And it's interesting listening to John Healey talk about the government's first priority. Of course, that is the West's first priority. I mean, the West out with America, Ukraine not having to cede any territory at all. What is Europe and the UK's second priority when later today in the early hours of the morning we find out what it is that Donald Trump and Vladimir Putin are putting on the table, and what the sort of broad contours are, and whether that involves ceding, be it de facto, if not de jure, a big chunk of eastern Ukraine, which appears to be the likeliest outcome. What does Europe say then? And yes, Keir Starmer didn't do any media with Volodymyr Zelensky yesterday, but I think everything he's been saying and doing this week has been about sort of putting himself at the head of the European conversation and staking out a very clear position.
Absolutely. Well, let's talk to Samuel Greene, the Professor of Russian Politics at King's College London, as well as being the Director for Democratic Resilience at the Centre for European Policy Analysis. Welcome to the show, Professor Greene.
Thank you for having me on.
Tell us what you think will be going through Putin's mind as he gets ready for this summit this evening.
Well, I mean, look, this summit really is kind of tailor-made to fit at least his tactical interests and to a certain extent his strategic interests, right? So it flips the script in terms of the amount of frustration we've been hearing from the White House about Putin. It flips the script in terms of Putin's isolation. And this was a U.S. that, at least under the previous administration, had supported the ICC arrest warrant for Putin on charges of war crimes. And here he is traveling safely to the U.S. and presumably back again. But the critical part, as you've been just discussing, is that the Ukrainians and the Europeans aren't there. And so his golden opportunity in this is to try to turn Trump into the bludgeon, right, that he needs to force the Ukrainians and the Europeans into compliance with the outcome that he would like to see. And the question for him is how compliant will Trump be in that effort? And, both of these men are constitutionally unpredictable, so I don't want to get too far ahead of my skis in predicting what happens.
I mean, it feels to me as if Putin has the upper hand in this summit. He can either refuse to agree to anything and carry on doing exactly what he's been doing for the last few months with this endless promises from Trump that he's actually going to take some action, or he could, as you indicate there, come out triumphant, holding on to the territory that he's taken by force. He must be feeling fairly confident.
I think he's probably reasonably confident, but doesn't mean he's entirely confident. Look, we're having this summit in part because he has to take seriously the prospect that Trump picks up his ball and goes home, and then he loses, really what is the only source of genuine leverage he has over the Ukrainians and the Europeans, and that makes this a much more difficult equation for him going forward. So he needs to continue to project some goodwill. The ultimatum that Trump had given him with that deadline of Friday last week was a problem that actually both of them needed to get around. I think that's why they're meeting in Alaska. But he can't be entirely confident that that dynamic won't return, and so he will probably have to acquiesce to some continuation of this process. By the same token, right, unless Trump gives him some signal that he is fully aligned with the Russian position about what the end of this war looks like, I think Putin will find it very difficult to countenance a meeting that involves Zelensky, because it's potentially, it further boxes him in and potentially, humiliating if it doesn't go his way.
Absolutely. Well, Professor Samuel Greene, Professor of Russian Politics at King's College London, thank you for coming on the show and talking about the imminent summit in Anchorage in Alaska, which is due to begin at 8 o'clock tonight, British time.
Quite a significantly symbolic choice of location, Alaska. I mean, from a kind of basic point, it's only a couple of hours actually across the sea from Russia at their closest point. Give us a bit more of the historic context.
Yes, although I'm not quite sure I can make sense of this meeting myself, but I'll do my best. So as well as the kind of geographical logistics of it kind of being an equal distance for Trump and Putin, it is a really historical state in terms of Russia's relationship with the United States. It was actually a Russian colony until about kind of when it was sold in 1867. It was sold to the States for about 2 cents per acre, which a lot of Russian nationalists kind of view as a major folly, as they would say. And it was due to Russia's economic situation after the Crimean War, factors like the depletion of the sea otter population. So it's been a US territory since then. But there was a really amazing report actually recently, which was debating how Russian is Alaska. I mean, Trump himself kind of called it Russia.
Yes,
recently.
Inadvertently, yeah.
Yeah, he did. I mean, a lot of Alaskan natives have Russian surnames. The largest building is a Russian Orthodox church. So symbolically, it makes sense. I think it's very important for Putin to be meeting Trump on soil that did used to be Russian, as well as it sort of being an equal distance between the two. So yeah, very symbolic.
And the precise location, the military base where the two are going to be meeting later, it's also got quite an interesting history.
Oh, yeah. So it was formed in 1940, and it was really crucial to countering the Soviet Union during the Cold War. And it still hosts kind of key aircraft squadrons. It's still growing. Trump himself, I think, is quite proud of this military base. He said recently that it's kind of their first line of defense. It's, big fighter jets, huge jets, best jets. So I think, it's also a very historic site. It's 64,000 acres as well. I mean, it really is a key US site for Arctic military readiness. So that also logistically makes sense, as it's able to host these two figures, as well as the kind of symbolic and historical importance of the base itself as well.
Yeah, it's really interesting. Vladimir Putin, preparing for this summit, has had, I think it's 48 previous meetings with American presidents, including, of course, Bill Clinton, George W. Bush, Barack Obama, President Trump himself, and Joe Biden as well. Have there been significant breakthroughs in history as a result of these sorts of summits? I mean, all the way back in June 2000, there was a Putin-Clinton meeting, and that was just after he'd become president, actually, Putin, and Clinton went to Moscow. There's these sorts of things take on a whole significance, but how much have they changed in kind of recent times?
What I will say about this meeting is that I don't think there will be any breakthroughs in relation to Ukraine. Whether or not there are other things on the agenda, there are reports that there will be other things on the agenda. I don't think there will be any breakthrough without Zelensky there. So other meetings, there's been trade agreements and a slight improvement in relations, but to say I'm skeptical would be a bit of an understatement.
Yeah, it's a tricky one, isn't it?
It's a tricky one.
Yeah.
Yeah, there have definitely been minor breakthroughs. I mean, these kind of meetings happen all of the time, and they are important in terms of trade relations and tariffs and all of these kind of international relations important factors. But I'm not particularly optimistic about this meeting in relation to Ukraine, at least.
Yeah. What about, I suppose, the ability for Russia to use this as a propaganda exercise? You mentioned the large Russian Orthodox Church, for example. Some Russian nationalists are extremely eager that Alaska become part of Russia once again at some stage. It is a bit of an open goal for people of that view.
Yeah, absolutely. I think Putin himself has said that he doesn't really have any interest in getting Alaska back because it's too cold. I believe he's on record as saying that, which is fascinating. I do think it is. I mean, a lot of them are very happy with the place of this meeting. I think it is a massive benefit to Putin. I mean, they're on record as saying they've kind of already won because of the site of the meeting. So I think from a propaganda perspective, it is very important. And it's also important to note that Putin actually can't travel too many places. So yeah, I do think there is an element of victory, and it will kind of aid the propaganda machine a little bit. I think it's a very good meeting place for them.
Antonia, thank you so much. Thanks for your time this morning. That is Antonia King, an academic specialising in American modern history at Royal Holloway, University of London.